everybody. Welcome to the Abroaders Travel Podcast, your weekly meetup with thousands of entrepreneurs, hustlers, creators, nomads, ninjas, wanderers, and world changers, all seeking to build the skills and connections to live a life without borders. If you want to learn more about what we do or download our entire podcast archive, check out the website, abroaders.com. Happy Wednesday morning and welcome to another episode of the Abroaders Podcast. I'm Eric here with AJ for the last time for a little bit in Austin, Texas. This is episode 163.
Yes, it is, man. They sneak up on us, man. We got a lot of exciting stuff coming up. I'm excited about this episode talking about some travel destinations. That's something I think we don't do enough of. We've gotten quite a bit of user feedback that they tend to enjoy those episodes. So it's going to be nice to dive into those 6 spots that we've kind of handpicked. Carnival's coming up. You're heading to South Africa and Brazil. I'm heading to Brazil. George is heading to Brazil. A lot of travel coming up, so pretty exciting times.
Yeah, it's gonna be a fun next couple of weeks. Today we're gonna dive into 6 destinations. I'm pretty excited about this one because I think Janelle did a really nice job. It's pretty common kind of clickbait type articles to write a top 10 or, whatever travel destinations. So we went through a lot of those and found some of the ones that are not only, I thought, interesting, but good value. And we're going to run through some of the logistics of just what types of points or about how much it would cost. Mm-hmm. And I think we got some good ones. I actually took a look through the travel plans for Abroaders app users. Yep. And almost half of our total travel, more than half, is from the US. And a huge amount of the travel is, if it's not to Europe, it's going to be either within the US or to Mexico, Canada, Caribbean, stuff that's relatively close, which I don't think is super surprising. Most people don't have the ability to get away for quite as long.
Yeah, I mean, going to Asia, if you have limited vacation time, you're going to spend a good chunk of your trip on a plane in an airport. So it's completely understandable. So yeah, the destinations we have, it's a nice mix. There's a few that are pretty close, and there's a couple that are a little bit further away.
Yeah, so a little bit of a stretch goal if you've got some extra time. All right, so we're going to get into that in just a couple of minutes. We do have some news. I would say it's kind of a slow week this week in terms of new developments. So we're going to send along some reminders. There's a few things that are going to be changing around the 1st of March. So we got a couple of updates about that. But let's start off. We got a couple of purchase mile bonuses that I wanted to cover. One's for Life Miles and one's for Alaska Mileage Plan. And before we get into the details of these, I just wanted to point out that one of the big reasons that we include these is a lot of times there can be a relatively easy opportunity to buy some miles to top up an account and give you enough for an award ticket that you already have. Right. And so I just wanted to share one example of how this can play out. John, who's one of our oldest customers, his first booking was back in 2014.
Mr. R?
Yeah, Mr. R. John R. Came in and he's looking for a flight leaving really soon from New York to Tokyo. And he doesn't have enough American miles to book it in business class, but he's got 2/3 of the miles he needs. So he's got 40,000 out of the 60,000. Yeah. And it turns out he can buy, American has a smaller bonus going on right now. It's not quite as good as the 2 we're going to talk about today. But essentially for less than $700, $650, you can buy those extra 20,000 miles and top up for the business class award. Yeah. So it might not be a great deal if you're looking at buying all the points. Then you're kind of looking at a pretty expensive ticket to buy cash.
Yeah, but in a real simple framework of, where will you be without buying the miles? Where will you be with buying the miles? If you have a little bit of money, it's
a really 15-hour flight.
It's a really good investment. Yeah.
And so this is a thing where if you consider either of these mileage buy miles promotions, number one, find the award seat that you want, make sure it's available. The example with John with American, we were able to verify that there's a direct flight from JFK to Tokyo.
That's
so
nice.
It's just paying $600 to upgrade to business class for that flight.
Is that going to be on American or JAL?
Japan Airlines.
So that's
even
premium.
nicer. Yeah, I've flown Japan's business class in long haul, and it's really nice. It's a super high quality experience. So keep that in mind with these ones. The first up is, like I said, Life Miles, which is Avianca's program, and they're offering 125 to 135% bonus. And so this is through February 28th. So this is going to end before the next show. So if you're thinking about this one, the good thing about Life Miles is that Star Alliance is the biggest airline alliance. So they've got access to the most different airlines, I would say, along with the other Star Alliance programs. And so this can be good. There's pretty much no region of the world that's not covered. And so you just want to do your research in advance and see what kind of pricing the award program has for the region pairs. But LifeMiles is a region-based program. So generally it's going to be a zone like US to Europe or US to Southeast Asia. Each one of those is going to have a fixed price in business, economy, and first class. And this is a tiered bonus. So you get at the minimum buying level, you get 100% bonus, which is pretty good. So you're paying about 1.65 cents per mile if you buy 1,000 miles or more. If you buy over 50,000 miles, you're getting 115% bonus. And if you buy over 100,000 miles, you're getting 125% bonus. And then it just looks like some people are getting targeted for even better. So for 135% bonus at the top level.
Yeah.
So, most people, I guess, probably don't have. The only transfer partner is Starwood Preferred Guests that transfers to LifeMiles. So that's another way to top up and not have to buy so many miles. So if you've got some SPG points, you're thinking about a redemption, verify availability, and know that you can probably top up that account at a lower cost than the most other situations of buying miles. This could be a good deal if you've got upcoming travel.
Yeah. The next one we've got is Alaska. And what they've got right now is a 40%. It goes up to 40%. So it depends on how many miles you buy and how much money you spend with them. But once again, this is a pretty good promo because typically Alaska doesn't really give you much more than this, where there's other airlines that are always selling miles and it's always at a discount and there's nothing special and you can always wait until the next time to get the same deal. However, this actually is a pretty good deal with them. Once again, if you have no idea what you're doing, you don't have any travel plans in mind, you don't want to buy these.
Yep.
But it works out pretty well. It was in 1 Mile at a Time had a blog post on this, and I thought it was pretty interesting. A nice call to action was urging Aussies to buy this because Cathay has apparently got a lot of availability from Australia. So that's a nice thing for the Aussies that may be tuning in and can't exactly take advantage of all the credit card stuff. This would be a way to essentially buy your way into a business class flight for about the cost of economy.
Yeah, exactly. And the biggest takeaway as far as Alaska goes is that you get a stopover on one ways. So in this situation, buying Alaska miles, you could really see two destinations in business class potentially. So it could be something like US to Asia, spend up to a year, spend a bunch of time in Asia, and then onward to Australia would be potentially one ticket price with the Alaska program, since you get that free stopover. So that's a nice increase. And by adding that, if you are going to book a stopover, I would say this is almost equivalent in a lot of senses to the LifeMiles promotion. It's a way lower bonus, but you're still only paying about 2.1 cents per point with maximizing the Alaska Airlines bonus. And if you stretch that into two stops, a stop.
Yeah, Alaska's a program that you can get into the 5-6 cents pretty easy on a redemption.
Yeah, and I would say premium tickets, Cathay is by far the cheapest and best if you can use them to get to Asia. Emirates is more expensive, but their business class, they raised the prices last year, but Emirates is another really nice kind of aspirational partner, and they tend to have a lot of availability. So those are probably the two top ones, but Alaska also partners with American Airlines and I think with Delta still, although that one's possibly going to come to an end at some point. But yeah, some really good opportunities there.
Speaking of Alaska, one of their lesser known partners, Hainan, has some new routes going on.
Yeah, so they applied to the FAA to open routes to the US from China. And the thing that's interesting about this is that China has this really weird regulation that competing airlines can't have flights to the US from the same city in China. Their strategy, the government wants to distribute air service because there's so many big cities. I mean, China has hundreds of cities, over 1 million people. And so they want to get more air service directly out of those cities. And so this is actually kind of a play that they're like the two routes that are opening up from LAX are actually hubs for one of their main competitors. And they just want to beat that competitor to the punch and open up that direct flight service so that the competitor can't. Yeah. And the reason the competitor hasn't is they don't have aircraft that can do it yet. So it's just kind of a weird thing. But the good takeaway here is that this airline has really good business class availability. It's pretty much wide open, and seems like that makes sense because it's kind of, there's more obscure destinations in China. But if you're going to Beijing and you can't find a direct flight from LA to Beijing, this could be a relatively easy fix where you just stop in another city, make a transfer in China, and still get a one-stop flight in business class. It's a really high quality product. So definitely something to keep an eye on. All right, so next up we got kind of a random story, but I came across this and I had no idea that this existed yet. This sounds like something from the future. So we know Google and Uber are working on self-driving cars, and I always kind of wondered how functional autopilot is. I know that planes can continue to maintain their heading and all that, a lot of that stuff's automated, but it looks like a couple of models of plane actually have the ability to land on autopilot. And I did not realize that was the case.
Me neither.
Obviously, you need a pilot to be there to take over in case the instruments get things wrong. But it sounds like the aircraft can essentially know whether it's doing everything okay and can guide itself down.
Yeah, there's an interesting thing that the Points guy republished. So this was originally on Quora.com, which for those people that don't know, it's a great place to waste a bunch of time reading other people's answers to other people's questions. And so this answer is really interesting because it is by a supposed pilot. So the question was, how does a plane land on autopilot? And the top response was by Bruno Gillison, an Airbus 330 and 350 pilot, and it is an exhaustive list of all the different things and dependencies and technology. But it's really interesting, to read a couple of these. One of the things he talks about is when the plane gets lower in elevation, it's going to stop using barometric pressure and it's going to use radio signals because it's way more accurate the lower you get, because the lower you get up,
how altitude
to gauge the altitude, and that's going to have that's going to trigger other things based on their altitude. And when they toss on the brakes and the flare, just a lot of different dependencies. I mean, it's just impressive how technologically advanced these planes are. And like you were saying, we still have pilots taking off and landing and even, flying the plane if there's an issue. But the planes can pretty much do like 99% of the stuff. And in theory, they can do it all if, for some reason, a pilot found out he was poisoned and had 10 minutes to program in the autopilot landing. There's a chance everyone could survive.
It's absolutely amazing. All right, so before we move on to the core content, we got a couple more things to cover here. I wanted to take a minute just to respond to a couple of reader questions, feedback, thank yous, and so on. Becky wrote in, just worked with Janelle to get a Korean business class ticket redemption back to the U.S. where she's going to see her granddaughter for the first time. So congrats to Becky on an awesome redemption, and thanks for sharing that success and letting us be a part of it. Also had a pretty cool conversation with Jimmy. And I wanted to bring this up because I know we've got folks outside the U.S.
Is this Aussie Jimmy?
Yes, this is Manal Jimmy. Okay. And it was a really nice call. Like, I like him a lot. I've met him a couple times in person. He's a hustler, entrepreneur, and he has recently broken into the U.S. credit card market despite being, I think he's a Kiwi, actually. Is he from Australia or New Zealand?
You know what? Sorry, Jimmy, if you're listening. I wanted to
He's from New Zealand.
Okay, yeah.
Because now I remember he was talking about going home and how much Air New Zealand's prices are challenging. But anyways, so I wanted to share at least one takeaway that I think could be valuable for everybody that Jimmy was nice enough to share. And that is that he said that the verification process was a pretty big pain in terms of the amount of documentation and information he had to give. And a lot of it centered around your residence in the U.S. You're supposed to have a physical residence. That's an anti-terrorism thing that they need to know where they can physically locate you. So it's not enough to have just a mailing P.O. box. You have to have an address. But the key win here was that he was able to sort of get a branch person. So someone at the local branch close to where he lives, he got a hold of them on the phone and said, look, I'm trying to apply for this card. This is where I live. Can you help me get this stuff through? And that person was able to be an intermediary between them and the credit approval people. So basically she would say, okay, we need this. And Jimmy would provide that. And then she'd pass it along to the Chase people.
You know what?
And she was able to be a buffer when they pushed back and said, well, actually, we need this. And she said, no, we've already asked him 3 times for documentation. Isn't this sufficient? Can't you push this through? And having an employee of Chase advocating for him turned out to be something that saved him a lot of time and ultimately got him approved for a car.
That's really encouraging to hear, because that is 2 for 2 of people I know that are actually both Kiwis.
That assistant, right?
Yes, got into and it was the same thing with Chase, where had to work through the bank, had to have somebody from the bank be your advocate. And so Jimmy, congratulations. Welcome to a new world of air travel.
Yeah, lots of points in Jimmy's immediate future. So thanks a ton, Jimmy, for sharing that takeaway. And hopefully, if anybody else has success that's outside the US but has a business ID or social security number and is working on getting cards, we'd love to hear about your experience. And hopefully we can distribute that and help other folks outside the US get access to some of those big lucrative sign-up bonuses. Last but not least, I've got feedback relating to our last podcast where we talked about the options for downgrading the Chase Sapphire Preferred card. And Jason wrote in to let us know that it might not actually be necessary to downgrade to the Sapphire and then change the Sapphire.
Yeah, he had some luck as of a couple months ago. So he was, hey, is this maybe a new rule, or maybe some people just had, I don't know. Like we don't know, but we've got a success case now, so we know that it is possible.
And I guess the best thing is just like if you do have a point, like a data point that contradicts what we said on the show, that's so valuable to just let us know, so we can pass that along and just kind of make a note, because we're keeping as much information as we can in our systems so that we can share what's working, what's not working, and what they say the rules are versus what's actually being enforced with the rules. So thanks a ton, Jason, for sharing that feedback as well. So a couple of just kind of general Broaders updates. We've had a really good month of February. It's been awesome to have George, Jake, you and I, and Janelle for a couple of days all in the same place. And we launched a couple of updates to the app. We got a bunch more on the way. So coming soon, not quite live yet. We are working on Award Wallet integration. So if you don't have an Award Wallet account, definitely now is a great time to get signed up. It's totally free. And within hopefully the next few weeks, we're going to be putting live something where you can integrate your Award Wallet account with the Broaders, and we'll be able to use your balances.
No longer have to manually enter your points balances in our application.
Yep. And we're really expanding a lot on what we can do. And this actually is a really good segue to travel plans. Because one of the biggest things that we do with the points balances that you share with us is we try and figure out if you have enough points for the trip that you've got coming up, and we'll let you know if it's available to book, if we see any award availability. Just really want to be making an effort in the next few months to reach out to people with travel plans and help them actually turn those into tickets and reservations. And so I just wanted to run through, because we've got some pretty awesome trips right now that are in the Broaders travel plans list. So we added the ability, and this is kind of embarrassing that we didn't have it from the very beginning, but you got to build things one at a time.
Software is difficult.
So we now have it set up so that you can edit and change your travel plans. And so it's really important just to keep those as up to date as possible so we can help you going forward. But in the next 6 months, we've got a ton of travel plans. I think we have well over 2,000 travel plans in the system that we're tracking and trying to help people build up the points balances. So if you haven't signed up for the app or you didn't add a travel plan the first time around, we're just looking for the rough date you're departing on, if it's a round trip, when you're coming back, and the airports that you want to visit. And then we're going to run the math, figure out how many points you need, and try and help you work towards that goal. But I was just amazed just kind of looking through the variety of different types of trips. We got at least one other person that's headed down to Carnival. So maybe be seeing some folks in Brazil. I'd love to bring my family to Disney World. Looking for a trip to Christchurch, so that's New Zealand, and Brisbane, Australia. We got some folks that are headed to conferences, getting their hustle on, doing some business development. Somebody's got Toronto, Seoul, Hong Kong, back to Toronto.
Someone wants to go to Paris.
Yeah, a trip to Barcelona with a stop in Paris, so maybe a good opportunity for Alaska miles. Just really great comments and just cool information. And it's fun to see all these travel plans, in the system coming to fruition. So again, add your travel plans if you haven't, or update those dates if they're in the past so that we can reach out and get in touch with you, help you guys get those booked. Looking forward to seeing this continue to grow, but it's been super exciting to see all these plans in progress.
All right, before we get into the core content, there's a few quick links that you can check out at the show notes, which is broaders.com/163. First thing is U.S. citizens can now get an electronic visa for Vietnam. No more doing the old process that was horrible. It's $25. It's your same single entry 30-day thing. This started February 1st. There's 40 countries that Vietnam granted this access to. The U.S. is one of them, so that is great, especially for all the expats in Southeast Asia hopping around.
Yes.
Delta SkyMiles redemptions on Jet Airways. the Indian airline. Those go live March 1st, so that'll be interesting to see how that pans out. And then finally, Hyatt Gold Passport program changes to the World of Hyatt. So that is what we've got for the quick links. And once again, abartas.com/163 if you want to do further exploring on the topics we just touched on.
All right. So time to get into the core content. As we said at the top of the show, today we're going to be talking about 6 destinations that you can visit with your points. Some of the ones that we thought were a little bit cooler. And we also have links to a bunch of other articles about possible travel destinations. So you guys can check that out if you've got even more curiosity or are looking for even a little bit more inspiration. But let's jump in.
Yeah, I hope this can be an anti-list for you guys. We actually really do think that these are worthwhile places, and we, are not some blogger that was told to write a top 10 thing and it had to be done by a certain time. So the first one we've got is a really interesting location. None of us have ever been to it, but we've only researched it, and that is Bermuda. So Bermuda is fascinating for a lot of reasons. It's really nice because it's got really easy access off the East Coast. Because Bermuda is just like hanging out in the Atlantic Ocean. It's just way off the coast, just in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean.
I thought it was in the Caribbean.
It's north, man. It's like if you look at like a Google map, it's I think around South Carolina or so. If you just jet out due east, it's like a 2-hour flight or so. So there's some interesting stuff going on. So as far as in the near future, in June, you've got America's Cup. So if anyone's into sailing, if anyone is fancy like that, that'll be going on there. That's going to be a huge event.
I'm not even into sailing, but it would be sweet to see a sailboat race in Bermuda. That's fun.
Interesting. So, you want to know that that's going to happen in June. If you want to have like a relaxing time with your family, that might not be the best time. Some other things that I thought was interesting is there's more golf courses per person than any other country. So you should be able to find some links to play if you are a golfer. A little bit of history that I thought was interesting. So it's named after a guy who actually never landed there. It was a Spanish explorer, Juan de Bermudez. And he claimed the islands for Spain in 1503, even though he never landed there. Just a typical bullshit move. So the exchange rate, the currency's pegged on the US dollar. And one final thing as far as like our little overview of Bermuda is it is really expensive. So keep that in mind. So again, there's some different ways you can frame this. So, if you're using points and miles, which we're about to get into, good ways to get there with points and miles, you save on your flight. So if you got, 3 or 4 people going, flights can be expensive. You don't pay on flights. Maybe you splurge on a nice hotel on the beach and you accept the fact that orange juice is going to cost $5 and you do that. Or if you have more money than time, you just have a long weekend and you just, pay good money for a great time.
So, and as far as the exchange rate, they do have their own currency, but it's a 1-to-1 with US dollars.
Right.
So you don't have to worry about dealing with what I'm about to deal with in South Africa with a nice 1-to-13 conversion. So that keeps things mentally simple on your vacation. So let's talk about how to get there.
Yeah, so airport code is BDA. And so from the United States, from the continental US, 17,500 for one way, one person is pretty standard. So that's what we've got on United. That's what we've got on American. That's what we got on Alaska, Singapore, Virgin, and then business class fares from the United States are about 60,000 points among those same programs. However, Janelle did put in some notes here that are really nice, and she's got a little sweet deal alert. So American Airlines and Flying Blue program, so that's Air France, have 25K to 30K round trip redemptions in economy. So that can be a nice little cheap internationalist type trip to a British-ish type island in the Atlantic.
Yeah. And also American has, so 60 is kind of average amongst the others, but if you find an American Airlines flight, the Advantage program is pricing business class round trips at 50K. So instead of paying 30 each way, you can pay 25 each way if you find those. Cool. I think Bermuda would definitely be a place that I'd be interested in.
And that means that you are like a part of the Bermuda Triangle. You're slightly more brave than if you went somewhere else that did not fly through the Bermuda Triangle.
That's true. I didn't even think about that, man. All right. So next up, we've got Canada, and there's some pretty cool destinations that have been on my list in Canada for a long time, especially Montreal. I just really have heard good things. Our friend from Mimic Method, Dowsa, spent about 6 months there, I think, and just had a blast. But I think one of the big attractions with Canada is, especially with summer coming up, there's a ton of national parks that are absolutely beautiful. very, very friendly people. This year, Canada is celebrating 150 years of independence from England. Sorry about that, George. And so there should be some events and some sort of extra stuff, as well as national parks are free this year in Canada.
That's really cool.
Which is pretty
good
awesome.
on them.
So yeah, I think, there's obviously lots of different cities, but I think some of the highlights would be Toronto, Vancouver, and Montreal. Those are very international cities, lots of mixed up culture, and just, a nice blend.
And my sister did her honeymoon in Canada. They went to Banff. And
really?
I mean, the pictures just looked stunning, looked great. And another thing I think is nice about Canada for some people that might be a little bit out of their comfort zone in some places that don't speak English is outside of Montreal, you pretty much got English with a little fun, cute accent for you, but it's easy to communicate, the road signs, everything, drive on the right side of the road, pretty simple.
Yeah, and so another nice advantage right now, $1 is about 133 Canadian, so you're getting a little bit of an exchange rate benefit compared to how things have been over the last 4 or 5 years. And so getting there, there's a lot of really good rewards. Like one of the reasons we wanted to put this as one of our featured destinations this week is just that we've got so many traveling plans that are in the system that are relatively short. We know that a lot of people don't have time for an 8-hour flight. And so from places in the US, you can get to Canada. It's going to be very low cost on your miles. In a lot of cases, it'll be almost the same as it is to fly domestically within the US. So from the US, 25K round trip is pretty standard, which is the same as within the US. You're going to find that with a lot of programs: Aeroplan, Alaska, Singapore, United, Delta at the lowest tier. And then that gives you tons of room to make moves with any transferable currencies. Amex transfers to Aeroplan. You've got Chase and Citi that transfer. So Citibank transfers to Singapore, and Air France, which can take advantage of Delta. There's just a ton of flights, a ton of options. It's one of the easier availability places to go.
And flights can be kind of expensive to Canada. You look up a flight from Detroit to Vancouver, that could be, $600 or $700 depending on the time.
Yeah, so Janelle did put a couple of sweet spots in here. I would say that if you don't have a ton of points, business class probably isn't going to be worth it because it's going to be domestic business class. There's very limited international configurations. One exception is if you're flying from JFK to Vancouver. So if you're going like a transcon equivalent flight, there's a really nice opportunity to redeem on Cathay Pacific. They have a fifth freedom from JFK to Vancouver that's going to be lay flat. They're internationally configured because that flight continues on from Vancouver to Hong Kong.
Okay.
So that's a really nice way if you're going across coast to coast. If you can use the flight between Vancouver, even if those aren't your origin and destinations, JFK to Vancouver is a good way to get lay flat business class US to Canada. Otherwise, you probably want to look at British Airways for bookings on American Airline Metal. Those you can potentially get under the normal fares of 25,000 round trip and potentially get something in the 17 to 20,000 range round trip, which can be an advantage if you can find some direct flights.
Yeah. Next up, we've got a place that you and I have spent a decent amount of time in the last year and a half or so, and that is Colombia. So there's a lot of things I like about Colombia. There's a lot of reasons that Colombia is a good place to visit. And one thing I took down notes on this too, because I think it's really important. So Colombia's still got kind of a rough reputation. You tell friends and family they don't really travel a lot, or they don't, think about international travel much. And is it safe? Isn't it dangerous? But what about the drugs? What about all this stuff? And like reputations outlast realities of countries. And we've spent some time there, and it's not a perfect country. No country's perfect, but the stuff you hear is just not true. Yeah. Like it's as long as you do a little bit of homework, it's a really safe place. So Colombia, people are super friendly. Colombia has a lot to offer. Our experience has been, 85% in Medellin, which is a great city. It's got a great climate because Colombia can be really hot, but Medellin's up in the mountains, so it's protected. It's about a mile high. Bogota as well, the country of the capital, is even a little bit higher. It's a bigger city. I mean, Medellin's got, 3 million plus people. You've got a bunch of outdoor stuff to do, a bunch of sightseeing, good dining, good nightlife. Same for Bogota. And a thing that I think doesn't get spoken about enough about Colombia is you've got the Pacific and you've got the Caribbean coast.
Yes.
And it just doesn't really happen to be a place that people give all that much play to. Super affordable.
Yeah, I went to Cartagena. I spent about a week in Cartagena in 2010, and it was a really cool experience. I will say, it's hot. It's definitely way
Yeah.
warmer than Medellin. But if you're looking for beach, there's some nice beaches around Cartagena. The beach in the city is not amazing, but it's a beach. It's relatively
Yeah.
clean. It's a pretty cool place. Thing that I thought was really cool about Cartagena, if you've ever been to Puerto Rico and seen like the big old like 16th century
Yeah.
fort. Like
Yes.
that is what Cartagena, they are defending, the entrance to the South
Right.
American continent there from the Caribbean, any navies that are out there planning to invade back in 500 years ago. So there's some cool history, and the old city is really interesting. It's like a really cool place to walk. It's easily walkable. And so that's something that's definitely worth checking out if you have an opportunity to be in Colombia. Cartagena, there's also Avianca does really nice, flights are super
Yeah.
cheap. You can get, like the bus ride is kind of long and harrowing
Yeah, you got-
because there's a
you
lot of
mountains.
mountain ranges. So my advice would be to fly if you can. And a lot of times you can find tickets under $100 to be able to
Yeah.
bounce around from one airport to another. So before you can bounce around and see different places in Colombia, and those are the ones that you want to buy is once you get there. We've got some pretty awesome deals as far as miles to get there from the
Yeah,
US.
so as far as flying in from the U.S., where there's going to be the most award availability is going to be Medellin, Bogota, and Cartagena. Those are kind of the three main cities that have a lot of routes. And, it's a good deal. It's a cheap way to get to South America. Most economy tickets are between 35,000 and 45,000 round trip. So that would be United, British Airways, Air France, American Airlines, and even Delta's got some in that price range as well. Not as much, but it's still there. Business class, anywhere from 60,000 up. Actually, 60,000 up. You got business class. United's got 70,000 for business class. Aeroplan 75,000. Delta's lowest tier would be 80,000. And there's actually a really interesting redemption that's just really, really cheap here. So Alaska, if you've got some Alaska miles like we're talking about earlier, they offer a 30,000 point round trip if you can find availability on an American Airlines flight. So that's something to keep in mind.
Yeah, I think the other thing that's often left out is you want to look at the paid flights on JetBlue. And so JetBlue's program is cash based. So the price of the ticket determines how many points you're going to need. It works just like Southwest, basically. But they've got a lot of routes out of Fort Lauderdale. And so there's a lot of really, a lot of times you can end up paying 8,000 or 9,000 JetBlue points instead of paying 15,000 each way or 20,000 each way. So definitely check out JetBlue before you make any moves to redeem a traditional zone-based or even a British Airways distance-based ticket to Colombia, because you may find that the paid tickets are cheap enough that it either makes sense to transfer Amex over to JetBlue, or even better, use like the Chase Sapphire Reserve card to buy a ticket on JetBlue and get 1.5 cents per point towards that price. So those are some good sort of options, but yeah, it should be relatively cheap. And once you get there, it's really cheap.
It's super affordable. Almost everything's affordable. Accommodation, taxis, nightlife, entertainment. It's it's one of my favorite places. It's definitely a place.
We're biased, but hey, I mean, we're
I will
experienced.
definitely be back.
All right, so next up we've got Portugal, and Portugal is at the top of my Europe list. It is the country that I most want to visit that I haven't been to. There's a little bit of overflow there just because I speak Portuguese. I like Brazil. I feel like there's probably some old cultural ties that I think I'll enjoy.
Absolutely.
But it's a beautiful country, and it's also one of the more budget-friendly Western European countries. So it's not going to compete still with Eastern Europe. There's a lot of places that you can still stretch the dollar further potentially. Specifically, a lot of the countries that don't use the euro yet.
Yeah.
So where you've got Hungary, that was a really cost-effective. But I think in terms of quality of experience, if you're just spending a little time for vacation versus baselining or bootstrapping a business, Portugal is a pretty awesome spot. I've got a couple of friends that have spent some time. The two major cities with a lot of international flights are going to be Porto and Lisbon. Very international, lots of mix, lots of different restaurants, different, stuff going on. And I read an article about new startups in Portugal, and they've kind of got a thriving entrepreneurship scene as well.
I was unaware of that.
Lisbon, just in particular, is starting to get some traction, starting to get some momentum. So if you're interested in meeting folks that are working on businesses, there might be some connections there. As far as getting there, As I said before, Porto and Lisbon are probably going to be the big ones, but there are also some flights, especially with low-cost carriers from other places in Europe, to Faro, which is FAO. And so that's just kind of like a third-tier city where the folks like Ryanair don't have to compete with the major flagship carriers.
Just wondering if there happens to be anyone from there, what they think about you calling it a third tier.
just in the flight sense, I'm sure it's a very nice place. But from the US, round trip economy, you should be expecting $30K each way. There's a few programs that you can get off-peak awards. Flying Blue is $25,000 round trip, which is great.
That's huge.
$25,000 each way. So
right.
that's a really nice discount. Off-peak with British Airways is going to be often priced at $22,500. So just super affordable. And then Singapore and ANA are also Star Alliance airlines that offer $55K round trip. So it might be a little more of a hassle than it might be worth in some cases. The other big thing with US to Europe is that you are going to run into some fuel surcharges. And so United, it might be worth paying an extra 5,000 miles, with a round trip to pay to do it via Singapore and pay $55, you're probably going to pay $300 or $400 in taxes and fees. Where with United, you could pay $60 and pay $50 in taxes and fees. So that's something to keep in mind with all of Europe, but for this example, especially with Portugal. So as far as sweet spots with award charts, I think the main ones, if you're going to be looking at ANA, which does require a round trip, they have a cheaper round trip, especially in business class. You can do that for $88,000, so a little bit under the typical business class pricing. And that can be worth it. Also, the main flagship carrier from Portugal is TAP Portugal, which is a Star Alliance airline. So you're going to have a little bit of an advantage. But because Europe's so well connected, you really, it's not a problem to fly into Madrid and catch a short hop flight back the other direction towards Portugal. So keep that in mind as well. British Airways points are going to be especially useful on Iberia to get into Spain and be really close to Portugal. So those are the two that I'd look out for, especially if you're coming from a big hub city in the US like New York or Dallas or something like that. Those ones are the ones that are going to have the easy direct flights to Madrid. If you're coming from a secondary city, a smaller airport in the US, you're probably better off with one of the zone-based charts where it doesn't matter how many connections you have.
Good words of wisdom, man. Next up, we're taking it to the opposite corner of Europe. So you were in Western, kind of Southwestern Europe, Finland in Northeastern Europe. So Finland is a country that I'm attracted to for a handful of reasons. Number one, it is, I don't know. I mean, maybe I just have kind of a skewed view on it, but it seems like they get, the least amount of credit in Scandinavia. Like Denmark and Sweden get a lot of play, Oslo and Norway and stuff, but Finland doesn't get a whole lot of play. It's a really small country, only 5 million people, and they have a lot to offer. It looks like some things that would be of interest for people that want to go there within the next year is December marks 100 years of independence. So kind of like Canada, you've got something going on there where there's going to be celebrations. The Finns are going to be happy. It is an outdoor wonderland. I actually have had a handful of friends, and I've lived vicariously through them on Facebook, seeing the pictures they've updated from Finland, and it looks amazing. I can't confirm this, but I did read that the Northern Lights can be seen up to 200 nights a year. So that's more than half the time the Northern Lights are available. I think it's really cool that you are very close to Russia. You're extremely close to St. Petersburg. That's a city I'd be interested in checking out. For Americans, now is probably like a decent time to go to Russia. Russia's sentiment towards the United States is a little bit stronger. But just a lot of cool things about Finland. It's a small country, 5 million people, just have a shitload of outdoors, nature, wildlife. They've got a new national park, Hossa, I think that's how you call it, a bunch of outdoor activities. So kind of a lesser traveled to place I think would be cool to check out. And as far as getting there, it's going to be similar with the zone-based stuff as Portugal, even though it's from the United States, a little bit further away. So you're looking at $60K a round trip, and Air France could get you there for $50.
The one thing I would say about Finland that's an advantage here is that if you're using One World points, so typically American or British Airways points, you've got Finnair, which doesn't pass on fuel surcharges, or they're very small, so you don't really have to worry about that so much. So the difference in price, if you can find a flight from New York to Helsinki on on Finnair, you're looking at probably like $50 to $70 in taxes instead of like $600 if you're flying through London on British Airways. So that's a really big win that, you still need to have the overseas segments, the one that's going to bring the most of those fuel costs. So it doesn't help you to fly British Airways to London and then connect on Finnair. But if you can find availability from one of their US routes, that's the way you want to go with One World. And then, I think everything we said about Portugal pretty much applies. Just get to Europe. And the other thing that I noticed when we were in Spain, Barcelona last summer, the exchange rate was like $1.
That's something we left out. Yeah,
it was like a euro was like $1.20, $1.15, and they're almost equal. $1 gets you 95 cents.
So Finland is going to be more expensive than Portugal, but with the euro having a little bit more parity with the US dollar, now is one of the better times to go. You know, like the same thing for the British pound. It's as good as it's been in a long time, so it will be more affordable. But it's still going to be more expensive than the Colombias, the Portugals of the world.
Absolutely. All right, so we're on to last but not least, number 6 is South Africa, and more specifically, Cape Town. I am really excited about taking a trip over there. This will be my first touchdown on the African continent, so getting to check off another big one as far as regions of the world to visit. So Cape Town is close to the southernmost point in Africa, and is the only place in Africa where you can see penguins, which is always interesting. And I mean, I think, to me that this place, like everything that I've seen and read, it attracts me. And I'm not really sure, what to even say about it until I get back and can report from some firsthand experience. But it's, it's a country or a city that is very international. It's probably the most international
city. It was the design capital of the world in 2014.
Really?
Yeah.
Interesting. So it'll be interesting, especially since I'm flying to Rio in about a week. So I'm going to spend a little time in Rio. Yeah. And we talked about the similarities. It's a mountainous, geography that's right on the ocean. Yeah. And I think that there's a lot of things that are going to be similar.
There's so much to count. Think about it. So Rio is Brazil's second city. São Paulo is the biggest, baddest city. Same for Cape Town. Johannesburg's bigger, badder. They both got the mountains. They've both got the beach. They've got, it's if you look at pictures, if you just take a quick glance, you could be confused if you're seeing a picture of Cape Town or Rio just by the nature of those mountains cascading alongside the ocean.
Yeah, for outdoorsy, this is going to be a little bit of a battle for me because I don't know how much Gabi wants to spend her time hiking on our little vacation, but there are some pretty cool hikes. There's this Lion's Head peak that's like over the southern point of Cape Town. It's got this lookout. Looks like a really brutal hell of a climb, so probably not gonna get to do that. But if you are an outdoors person, there's a lot of hiking, a lot of very cool scenic stuff to check out. And I guess the only drawback as far as the currency, I think the US dollar is going to go pretty far, but I'm going to be drawn into one of those challenging weeks of mental math.
13 is
$1 is about 13 South African rand. As far as getting there, it's pretty straightforward in the sense that almost all your flights are going to route you through Johannesburg or Cape Town. Johannesburg is the big hub. We're actually connecting in Joburg to get to Cape Town, and South African Airways is a Star Alliance member, so the biggest opportunities, the probably easiest routings are going to include South African Airlines. So you're probably looking at a better advantage. As I mentioned before, you are going to pay a lot more in fuel surcharges with a lot of the other South African, with a lot of the other Star Alliance carriers. So United can potentially save you a lot of money if you want to use those points then. And they're, of course, a transfer partner of Chase Ultimate Rewards. But there are lots of different ways to get there. You can use American miles, and the routing is probably going to be via the Middle East or Europe. If you use American miles, it's probably going to be extra because of the zone transfer rules. So American charges you for US to Europe and then Europe to Africa. So I would say American's probably the one point that you want to try to avoid if you can. Because you're ending up buying 2 award tickets with American. So United's going to be better and Delta is going to be better in that sense. I think with Delta, you're probably going to be routing through Paris or Amsterdam and booking a flight on KLM to continue down. So that's a pretty legitimate way to do it. And Air France is probably going to be cheaper than Delta. If the availability is there and you have transferable points, that's probably the way to go. And then obviously my situation is a little bit different because I'm flying from Sao Paulo, but that is an alternate routing that's not actually that much more distance. So if you're considering going from North America to Europe and then down to South Africa, it's roughly the same, or Middle East even is roughly going to be the same distance covered. If you do have a visa to Brazil, there's wide open availability on the Sao Paulo to Johannesburg. So depending on where you are in the US, if you're in Dallas or something like that, it's just as fast to fly to Sao Paulo.
I never even thought about that.
That way.
And it was interesting. You were talking about this last week, how the flight there is a lot faster than the flight back.
Yeah, it's like 8 hours there and 10 hours back.
Jeez.
So
Jetstream
really gets you on that. So those are our top 6. I hope that was valuable, helpful to you guys. The articles that we used to draw upon for these had some other just very cool destinations we just didn't have enough time to get to. So if you're interested in Oman, Bolivia, Morocco, Seoul, South Korea, Madagascar, and there's also a couple of different destinations in Mexico that are featured in some of those articles. So if we just got your Wanderlust activated and you want to do a little more exploring, we got some cool articles to link to. Any ones on that list, the ones that we didn't have time for that you're particularly interested in?
I'd like to take another stab at Morocco. Because my visit there was just so transactional. Madagascar looks great. I know there's so many hidden gems in Mexico. The same situation in Colombia. Mexico's tourism has been tarnished by some problems that don't affect the entire country, and there's good places to go. One that is not on there that I want to look more into, and I want to go to, and I will go to, is Turkey.
Yeah.
And it's the same idea. They've had some really bad stuff happen, but I've heard nothing but good things. It's a lot of travelers I know, that is their favorite place. I think that's got to be one of the top ones out of travelers I've kind of, independently surveyed about where have you been, where have you liked. Turkey is one place that people's eyes light up, and just, everything about it. It's such like a dynamic place, man. You've got East and West, coming together right there, Istanbul. So definitely fascinated about Turkey.
Yeah, I think for me, the one that we didn't get to is Bolivia. So I spent 6 months in Chile, got to see a lot of the southern part of Chile and Argentina. So really lucky in that sense. Like Patagonia is beautiful and amazing, but the northern part of Chile is desert. It's the Atacama Desert, and that goes into Bolivia. And there's the salt flats in Bolivia. I think a really interesting.
It's kind of the redheaded stepchild of South America, Other than the Northeast.
Upset.
Yeah, well, in the Northeast, no one really knows much about what's going on there because there's not really tourism. But like Brazil's got the beaches and all this stuff. Argentina's got the wine, and they've got the mountains. And Buenos Aires is this cosmopolitan city. Chile's got the mountains and wine and coast, and Colombia and Ecuador.
Bolivia got boxed out.
They're landlocked.
So they got there was a war between Chile and Peru and Bolivia, and Peru and Chile got the coastline. And they just canceled out Bolivia's access that they used to have. So no beach, but I think just a really cool destination, and one of the economies in South America that is really cost effective for people with the U.S. dollar. I mean, it's there's potentially some frustration in the sense that maybe services and some of the stuff that you expect on a more relaxing vacation might not be as available, but in terms of exploring,
could be
and
a great
having a
adventure
really
destination.
Yeah, I think it's super cool. I'm also interested in Peru, but for some reason Bolivia just has been calling my name. So
I hear you on that.
Hopefully soon. All right, so that's going to wrap it up for this week's show. Thank you so much for being with us. Next week, we are going to cover news and updates, and we're going to talk a little bit about the new Starwood Preferred Guest offers. But just as a quick preview, those cards, if you haven't gotten them yet, if you've never had them, both the business and personal version are up to 35,000 points.
Which is an all-time high? Has it ever been higher than that?
It's never been higher. So this is it's tied with one short period of time last year. Anyways, we're going to talk through some of that in more detail next week. But if you're anxious and that you haven't signed up yet, we'll have the links for those in this week's show notes. Again, that's abroaders.com/163. Have a safe trip to Brazil, man, and I will see you down there.
Yeah, I'll see you in Sao Paulo in like a week and a half.
All right. And we'll see you guys next week.
All righty.
Hey, Broaders, don't be shy. Hop over to the website and join our email list for exclusive travel hacking content. If you like what we're up to, the best way you can support the show is by leaving us a 5-star review on iTunes. Lastly, we would love to hear from you. So